we handle our anger biblically by not returning good for evil, or by returning good for evil. Let me get it right.
Can you?
Yeah,
You may want to
clarify that. I went back and spoke it in Richard's words instead of God's words. Listen, if somebody does evil, you return good for that, and you can't. If you don't, there's been a few times in my life, and fortunately, I'm not a highly emotional. I'm not easily strung. I know. I'm a big old teddy bear. Just ask me. But the problem is when I do get angry, I get angry. When something really gets me, it's not just that I get a little frustrated. And my problem is when I get angry, I'm that guy that goes angry out of control angry. Fortunately, I don't use violence to go with that, but I use words to go with that. You know? And quickly I get it back under control. But the problem is once I've already returned evil for evil, once I've already become angry and unleashed on someone with a verbal barrage, I just soon have slapped them at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I've already done the damage, I've already done the harm, and that anger is never reversed.
Welcome to the Reality Is podcast, where we're here to talk about real life and real faith. My name is Joey, and I'm here with Richard today. And man, do we have a topic, especially today. So today, if you guys know, we actually pre-record this, and then it comes out like a couple of days later. And today is Election Day. And we're talking about anger. And man, is that going to be one of those, by the time this comes out, we actually may not still have the results. I don't know how long it's going to take. But I know by the time people are listening to this, there's going to be some angry people. Right. And I don't know which side's going to be angry, but no matter what happens, half of our country is going to be angry. Somebody's going to be upset about something. Yeah. And so I went to look up what AI has to say about anger. And I thought this was really good. It says anger is an emotional response to a perceived threat, injustice, frustration, or wrongdoing. It can range from mild to irritation to intense rage and is typically characterized by feelings of hostility, displeasure, or resentment. Anger can be triggered by external events, situations, or people, or by internal factors like stress or unmet expectations. While it is a natural and normal emotion, it can become problematic if not managed properly, potentially leading to negative consequences in relationships, decision-making, and personal well-being. Come on, AI. I'm going to give you that one. That's good. But now, I've also looked up what the Bible has to say about anger. And the Bible actually has a lot to say about anger. Therefore, I know you have a lot to say about anger, since that's today's topic. And for me, like one of the most misquoted verses out there is, Bible says don't get angry. No, not what it says. It says, in your anger, don't sin. Right. And so today we want to talk about what does anger look like? And if we can, kind of how do we manage that? Like, how do we get through our anger? Because like we get angry at times. We get angry over certain things. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I get angry over silly things. So can you kind of lead us into and guide us and direct us to kind of an overview of biblically what is anger, and then how do we manage that? Like, how do we deal with that in our lives?
Well, I think first of all, we have to know that God created us as emotional beings, and part of that emotion, one of those is anger. Yeah. And absolutely. All of us get angry from time to time. I mean, we can get angry because we're mistreated, misunderstood. We can get angry because we feel threatened. I mean, there's a number of things. We can get angry because we're on I-26, as I like to tell people. And when we stop and we think about anger, Joey, in and of itself, anger is not a bad emotion. It keeps us alive in many cases. It keeps us safe in many cases. But anger that is not kept in check, and anger that is an unbiblical or unscriptural, we have a problem there. I think going back to see what the Bible tells us, in Proverbs, as you know, I love to read Proverbs. Absolutely. And Proverbs 14:29 says, a patient person shows great understanding, but a quick-tempered one promotes foolishness. Oh, yeah. And so the first thing we understand is our quick temper, our out of control temper, is just promotes foolishness. I wish I could sit here and say that I've never been the quick temper. I wish I could say I haven't in the last 2 weeks been the quick temper. But
you're a pastor, you get angry
just at you. But when we stop. And I'm sorry, that was out of line.
But it came out so naturally, didn't it? I mean, it was like in no beat at all. It was like just at you, and you went right on. But that's okay. I'm not hurt. I'm not angry.
Exactly. when we become angry, just think about what he tells us. It's not that we're just foolish. We're promoting foolishness, which tells us that my anger promotes a foolishness that does pass off to other people. You think about how quickly one angry person can infect a room full of people. And so that's one thing. I love what he says in Proverbs 22 because he goes on to say, don't make friends with an angry person. Don't be the companion of a hot-tempered one. You will learn his ways and entangle yourself in his snare. He's just telling us that hot-tempered person, that angry person, they're going to drag you right down their rat hole. Yeah. And I don't know how many times that I have unfortunately been both the angry one and the one that was the target of the angry one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how quickly you do get drugged down. And so when we think about anger, we need to realize that the scriptures warn us that our anger doesn't impact just us. It's going to impact a number of other people as we look at that. I also want us to make sure that we recognize, as we began with, not all anger is sinful.
Yeah.
And not.
I mean, James says, be slow to anger. It doesn't say don't get angry. It just says be slow to anger. And a lot of times we deal with anger in such different ways. Like a lot of times people just blow it off. They'll laugh it off. Right. They put on this fake persona sometimes, and they're burning up inside, but they don't want to let people know, especially in the Christian realm or in churches, because, we're coming to church today, so we have to put on this face and we have to look like we are, happy at all times. And you and I talked about happiness versus joy a while back. No, that's not it. It's okay to be angry. Like you can't come into church and people are going to look at you and go, "Ooh, that person's angry today. They must be, a sinner." No, we're all sinners. Like, come on, there's got to be something else.
Right. Well, I think one of the best explanations I've ever heard for anger is we're like a pressure cooker. And if you don't allow a pressure cooker to vent, it blows. And when it explodes, it makes a big mess. And yet you put a vent on it and it slowly allows the steam to pull off. And I think many times as believers, we fail to recognize that anger is a very real emotion. Yeah. We live in an angry world.
Yes,
we do. You said as we began that today's election day. One thing about it, in the next 24 to 48 hours, maybe 72, who knows, 50% of our nation's going to be angry.
Yep, exactly.
And so what do we do with that, especially as believers? And I think one of the things that we have to recognize is Christian counselors have told us that 50% of the people they deal with, 50% now, they deal with because of anger issues. Yep. And so you stop and think about the number of people in this country that are literally imploding inside because they've allowed anger to completely dominate their life and all that is about them. And so what do we do with that? How do we process that? Where do we go?
That's exactly what I know, because especially as a Christian, anger can sometimes lead to people hating or being unforgiving towards others because they've got this anger inside of them. And what I'd like to hopefully be able to put some people's mind at ease to say that there's a way that you can cope with that. There's a way you can deal with your anger. We are not saying don't be angry because the Bible doesn't say that. So please don't hear us saying, don't be angry. Yes, anger is an emotion. As you have said, you've clarified, it is an emotion that we have been given. We have been created with that. But now, how are we going to deal with our anger?
Well, I think the first thing, if we could, is just make sure that everyone understands there is a thing the scriptures refer to as righteous indignation.
Thank you.
Okay? And that is being angry. The best way I can define that is is I'm angry at the things that make God angry. Okay, and Scripture is clear about that. When my anger is targeted, for instance, at child abuse or pornography or racism or homosexuality, abortion, and the like, those things that angers God.
Yeah.
And I think we need to recognize that. And so now that righteous indignation does not give me the right to physically abuse or hate. No. So please don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but it is
I'm going to act out on God's behalf because God's angry. Now I'm angry and I'm going to deal with it. No, you don't get to do that.
And that is not what it tells us. But what it does remind us is these are the things that anger God. These are the things that displease God. And we should be displeased and angered at the things that anger God. And so, with that being said, as we look at this and we see what it tells us, it's important to recognize that an anger targeted toward an injustice is a good, righteous anger. It is not an anger that gives us a right, again, to be violent or something of that nature. But anger can become sinful for a couple of reasons. And I think the main reason that we find is our anger becomes sinful when we motivate it with pride. And James 1:20 says, "For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God." And so my anger, my wrath, is never going to produce the righteousness of God. And so there's not a right for me to claim righteous indignation, but yet at the same time be venting and spewing hate and evil. That's not ever going to be the righteousness of God.
That's not what we're called to do. And again, if you're trying to represent Christ, and if you're looking on saying, hey, the pastor just said I have a right to be angry at the things God's angry at, so therefore I'm going to act. No, please, you don't get to do that.
And I think the other thing is when we think about when our anger becomes sin, it's when it distorts God's purpose in our life. All right, in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 31, he tells us, "Therefore, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do all to the glory of God."
Love that verse.
Okay, so if I'm not doing it to the glory of God, and my anger is targeted at an individual and not the sin, then I'm not doing that to the glory of God. I know that the world hears us say, and I get it, I understand, but the world hears us say, love the sinner, hate the sin. And they look and they go, there's no way, you can't differentiate that. Well, in a human sense, you can't. No. And so in my flesh, it's impossible for me to do that. I equate the sin and the sinner as one and the same.
Yeah, because they're the one doing the sin.
Exactly. But when I'm looking at it from God's point of view, then I can very much love the person and have righteous indignation at what they're doing. But that does not give me the right to be God and exact vengeance on that person.
Yeah, and actually, you talked about it before. In loving someone and you see somebody sinning, you can love the person by letting them know, hey, this is what you're engaged in. This is what's happening right now. It's going to lead you down this path. And because you love that person, you're telling them the truth about the situation. You're angry at what they are doing. You're not angry at them. And in love, you're explaining their situation to them and trying to guide them down another path so that they don't have to fall into the trap that they've set up for themselves.
And we have to recognize that because we truly do want to bring glory to God.
Yeah.
And I know you've had the same situations. I have had people literally turn red, veins pop out in their neck, just so angry at me because I simply say what God says.
Yep, tell them the truth.
And I mean, literally, I can't apologize for that, but nor does that give me a right to vent back. I have to do it to the glory of God.
Yeah, I've been on the other end of that where somebody's speaking truth in my life and I'm getting upset that they just couldn't see me change colors because I kind of stay this color. Yeah. so praise God they couldn't see but they saw the veins.
Yeah. Well,
go on.
I was just going to say, so we got to live for God.
Yeah.
And we can't do that. Now, I think the third area that we have to recognize that our anger becomes sin is when we allow it to linger in our life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in Ephesians 4:26 and 27, it says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil." So I want you to think about that. When I allow sin to or anger to linger in my life, then I'm giving place to the devil in my life.
Absolutely.
And so the question I think that is worth considering is, how do I not let sin linger? How do I not let anger linger in my life? How do I get over that? And that becomes the difficult thing that we have to deal with.
Yeah, because again, in our own emotion, in our own human mind, in our own dealings with things, look, I remember things.
Right.
I remember what this person did to me. I remember how they affected me. I remember how upset I was. And, you always hear forgive and forget, forgive and forget. Yeah, I can forgive, but I have a problem forgetting. But that doesn't mean I get to hold on to that anger, that emotion, that feeling that I have towards that person. I have to, biblically speaking, I have to let that go. I remember it. I forgive you for what you've done. Therefore, the anger is not staying in me, because anger is going to cause me now to start sinning because I'm holding on to something I'm not supposed to be holding on to.
Well, what happens is our anger, even if it started as righteous, it quickly becomes very personal. And then, words have meaning.
Yes, they do.
And in Romans chapter 3, the apostle said, "Their throat is an open tomb. With their tongues they have practiced deceit. The poison of asp is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness." He's reminding us, man, our words have so much power. And see, the problem is you've heard someone say in a heated moment, they make a statement and they immediately say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean that." Well, the problem is you can't take that back.
No, you can't.
And actually, at that moment, you meant that.
You said exactly what you were feeling. Out of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Exactly.
That's what I felt. That's what I said. Oh, I'm sorry I said it. Okay, you're sorry you said it, but you meant it.
Right. And therefore, that hurt and that anger is there. I've had people say, "Well, how do I know that I'm angry and I can't let it go?" And I'm like, "Well, you really don't have to ask me that, because that's what keeps you up at night. That's when you're driving down the road, minding your own business, so to speak, and then suddenly you just get mad." And what happens, Joey, as we think about how to handle our anger biblically, if we're not handling it scripturally, then I get angry about something that has nothing to do with you. You and I are sitting talking about a worship service, or as elders talking about something in the church, and then suddenly I get angry at you, and you're sitting there going, "Whoa!"
Yeah, all I said was
And so our anger, it vents out, and this is the reason he tells us not to let the sun go down on it, because all we're doing is giving place to Satan. And I know I've been there. You've been there. Where we're not handling it biblically.
Yeah.
And if we're not handling it biblically, it builds up. One of the best classes I had in Bible college, at Fruitland Bible College, when I was there, first semester, we were all required to take a class on making peace with our past. In fact, I got each of the staff one of those books, and it demonstrated to me how much anger I was holding from the past, and how much anger that I had never let go of. And when you really stop to think about that, then all of us are there. Now, the question is, do I choose to hold on to that and give place to Satan, or do I choose to biblically do that? So,
I think sometimes too, because you think you've gotten over something, right? And you're like, I haven't thought about it in ages. Like, I've completely forgot about it. I've let go of it until somebody brings that person's name up. And then they mention the name, and you just start boiling and things start going inside. You haven't let go of it. But you keep talking about handling it biblically. So I think what we need to get to is like, how are we supposed to do that? Because you keep talking about, okay, handle it biblically, handle it with the scriptures, handle it with that. And yeah, these are great things. And you and I know there's plenty that the Bible has to say about anger. But I think the people listening now, especially the people who are listening to us, they go, well, I don't have those biblical understanding. I don't have the knowledge. Can you point me to some of the scriptures that can help me deal with it biblically? And I ask you that, but I'm sure you've probably already, it's like, oh, of course I can tell you how to handle it biblically.
I have a couple of areas. Let's first of all say we handle anger biblically by recognizing, and admitting.
Ooh.
Okay. So it's not just recognizing a problem, it's admitting that our prideful anger and the wrong way we have handled anger in our life. Okay. So what I have to do is I have to admit it, and then I have to not only admit that it's sin, but I have to admit I've handled it wrong.
And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to just to jump off the bat and say, well, the first thing, Joey, you have to do is admit, wait, I have to, it's this thing called confession. And when you do that, when you admit to somebody, this is what's going on, it actually relieves so much of that built up anger that you've had in already. Now you're telling somebody about this and I'm admitting, I'm upset about it, I'm handling it wrong. Oh, that in and of itself is already a start to the relief.
Right. Well, Proverbs 28:13 tells us this: he who covers a sin will not prosper, but whoever confesses and forsakes them will have mercy. And so, listen, if I'm angry, if you and I've had a problem and I'm angry, if I cover the sin, if I cover the anger, all I'm doing is making it worse for me and you both.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen is our relationship's going to be strained, and you on the outside looking in are going to be going, "What is his deal?" And me on the outside looking in is going to be going, "He doesn't even care what he did."
Yeah.
And the whole time you don't even know.
Yeah.
And how much further down the road would we be if we just admitted that there was a problem and dealt with it?
Yeah.
And so. And then the same thing with our sin, because 1 John 1:9 says that if I confess, he is faithful and just to forgive. But if I don't confess that sin of anger, then there's no forgiveness.
Yeah, no forgiveness, no cleansing, none of that is going to be taking place. So it's a great point, admitting it. And we talked about in the previous podcast, there are people in your life that you have to build this trust with. I get that. Like, you don't just want to just grab somebody who you don't know or recognize as a friend and say, "Hey, come here. I gotta admit something to you. I gotta confess something to you." Well, what are they gonna do? Hey, they can come to you. They can come to any of the pastors on staff, and we'd love to help you through it. But there's also a friend that sticks closer to their brother that you can have this conversation with as well.
Yeah, and I think that is so important. And I know that confessing it to God, the friend that sticks closer than a brother. But then honestly confessing, I've dealt with situations before where people have come to me and they've said, "I know you're angry at me." And I'm like, "No, I'm really not. But you ignored me, or you didn't talk to me, or you said this or that." And I'm like, "No."
Yeah.
But we have to deal with that stuff. And on the flip side of that, there have been times that I've been extremely angry at someone and just chose not to address it.
Yeah.
And so that becomes sin. Second of all, I think we handle anger biblically by seeing God in our circumstances. And James reminds us that trials are in our life and God grows us through them.
Yes, indeed.
All right.
Yes, indeed.
So I have to see God in my circumstances. I have to see that as I'm working and striving and struggling in life, that God is working through people in my life, through circumstances in my life.
And he's working through you, through the circumstance that you are in right now. I think a lot of times people think, "Oh, well, bad things are happening to me because I'm bad," or, good things are happening to them because they're good. No, this is not the way it works. The Bible says it rains on the just and the unjust, right?
Exactly.
So please don't look at that and go, "Oh, something in my life must have happened and God's mad at me." No, God loves you. God's always there for you. But recognizing that you are going to go through a trial. You've said it so many times. I think you just said it a week ago. You are either going into a trial, coming out of a trial, or you're in a trial. Those are just the three truths about trials.
Yeah, I think one of the things we fail to recognize is when things happen to us, we have an opportunity to many times bring glory to God out of it. I love Genesis chapter 50, and Joseph's brothers are his dad's died, and now they think, okay,
we're done.
Joseph's getting ready to drop the hammer on us, and so they come to Joseph. Dad said, they're already trying to get out of their issue, but Joseph looks at them and he says, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." And sometimes we have to recognize that the things that make us angry, God may be working a bigger purpose and a bigger plan, goes way beyond us. If you look at Philippians chapter 1, Paul says, the very people that were supposed to be my friends, my allies, the ones that were in the struggle with me, they're the reason I'm in chains.
Yeah.
But he said, the really cool thing is, I have a captive audience. I've got the palace guard.
Yep.
And I'm able to share the gospel.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So we handle it by saying, you know what, I don't like the circumstance I'm in. I certainly don't like the way I've been treated, or I don't, but God can.
God, and God's allowing me to go through it right now. I love the story about David, where he's walking down the road. He's got all his boys with him, right? That's me paraphrasing. All his homies are walking down the street with him, right? And there are people and just cursing him and saying all these bad things. And his boys are like, "Man, you want us to go? We'll handle this. We'll take them out." And David says, "No. What if God is allowing them to say these things to me right now? Don't worry about that. That's between them and God. God is allowing this to happen to me right now. You don't need to go take care of him." And it puts such a perspective on things for me, because when I'm going through something, I can go, "Why is that? Why are these people?" No. God's allowing it to happen, and it's okay. God's got your back. God's for you. Nobody can be against you. So if you're trusting in God, you're letting God handle the things that he wants to handle in your life. Whatever anybody says about you, whatever anybody's doing to you, it's not going to matter, because God may just be letting that happen in your life right now, and he's going to take care of it. Don't get angry about it. Just let go and let God.
Right. And in our anger, how many times do we take a circumstance that God could have used for his glory, but we allow our anger to take that circumstance into an unusable place? You have a situation to speak into someone's life in their anger, but you lose that situation because you get angry back. And I mean, what if Joseph would have taken that in Genesis 50 and said, "Well, I'm glad Dad said that," all for their heads. And he had the power to do that.
Absolutely, he did.
But instead, he uttered words that thousands of years later we still say. And that's important.
And I love that. Joseph is one of my favorite stories.
Absolutely.
When I first read through Genesis and I got to that, I was like, wait, what's happening? And then to see that line where he says, "Man, what you guys meant for evil, God meant for good." And again, to take that perspective on something, you just have to go, that person's in a different place. And you and I have said, we can't do this on our own strength. This is something that we need the power of the Spirit in us to help us. But you got to call upon the power to help you get through
Exactly. I think you touched on it a moment ago, but I think it's worth bringing back out. And that's, one of the other areas that we deal with anger biblically is we make room for God's wrath. It's not my place to correct or to right the ship, if you will. God's wrath. And so if there's wrath to be done, in Genesis chapter 50 and verse 19, just before he said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good," he began the statement with his brothers this way: "Don't be afraid. I am in the place of God." Otherwise, you thought you pulled something off, but wrong. God had something going. Romans 12 reminds us that we're not to avenge ourselves, but we're to give place to the wrath. For vengeance is mine, God said, I will repay. And so if there's an unjust attack if I'm being attacked for righteousness' sake, let God handle it.
Sometimes we don't like the way God handles it,
No.
or the timing of God handling it. And I had to look back at myself one day, put myself out there. If God had dealt with me the way he should have dealt with me when I was doing certain things, instead of taking the time to build me up and let me become who I'm supposed to become in him so that he could be glorified, what would my life look like? What would somebody else's life look like? Just let God deal with that person. But that's hard because
absolutely. Well, the only way we can do that is the next idea, and that is we handle our anger biblically by not returning good for evil. Or by returning good for evil. Let me get it right.
Can you?
Yeah,
you may want to
clarify that. I went back and spoke it in Richard's words instead of God's words. Listen, if somebody does evil, you return good for that, and you can't. If you don't, there's been a few times in my life, and fortunately, I'm not a highly emotional. I'm not easily strung. I know. I'm a big old teddy bear. Just ask me. But the problem is when I do get angry, I get angry. When something really gets me, it's not just that I get a little frustrated. And my problem is when I get angry, I'm that guy that goes angry out of control angry. Fortunately, I don't use violence to go with that, but I use words to go with that. You know? And quickly I get it back under control. But the problem is once I've already returned evil for evil, once I've already become angry and unleashed on someone with a verbal barrage, I just soon have slapped them at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I've already done the damage, I've already done the harm, and that anger is never reversed.
Yeah, and you're misrepresenting God. You're misrepresenting the church. You're misrepresenting Christian. Thankfully, I have a wife who knows how to get me back in check because, I'll blow up over. For me, a lot of times it's driving just because on the road and there's just crazy people on the road. But like I will just go into and my wife would be like, "Baby, you're representing God right now." And you're representing the church because a lot of times I'm wearing church swag and I'll have the Crossroads logo on there. It's like you're representing the church right now. Okay, yeah. So I can get back into place, but why is it that we're just so easily, well, for me, I can just go like that and be like so upset because somebody did something to me, and it's like, did they really do something to you? Did that person even know that they did? Especially driving. Did that person even know that they did that to you? No. What are you so upset about? Well, because, and I think a lot of times that's my own pride. Yeah. Because I consider myself better than that person. But what does the Bible say? Consider others higher than yourself. And that's a place where I have to get to.
And I think that's key. And again, we immediately repay evil for evil.
Yes.
I mean, it is. Okay, you and then I return, and then we go back and forth.
Back and forth.
In Matthew chapter 5, listen, Christ said, "You've heard it said that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." And he comes back and says, he said, "But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully persecute you." And I'm like, what?
I'm praying for them. Okay, I have to.
But then he reminds us why. He said, "Listen, your Father in heaven causes the sun to rise on the good and the bad, and sends rain to the just and the unjust." And when all of that is said and done, and he reminds us that through the way we respond to people, we point people to him, and we become more like him.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you have to process that. And for me, it's difficult. I wish I could say it wasn't. And, the evil for evil's easy.
It sure is. So, it's the other time. And you know what's funny? Because it says you'll be heaping coals on their head. And so I remember trying that. So somebody was like spewing evil things at me.
So you heaped coals on their head?
No.
I'm sorry.
No. I wanted to. But instead... I was just continually nice to them. I'm continually smiling at them. I'm saying loving things to them. And I'm watching them get angrier and angrier.
Right.
And the more kind I am to them, the angrier they're getting. And that's when it hit me. I'm like, oh, I'm pouring hot coals on their head right now. And I'm really just trying to be nice. I'm trying to be, and it's just making them more and more angry. Well, I can't let their anger disrupt the way I'm supposed to be treating them.
Exactly. Which really brings us to something I think is extremely important at that point, and that is we handle our anger biblically by communicating to a resolution, okay? Not communicating to self-vindication, not communicating to prove I'm right and you're wrong, but working to solve a problem.
But I am right.
I get that. I get that. Every conversation I've ever had with you, you've been the second closest to right in that conversation, but you've never been first. But anyway,
it's okay.
Yeah. Which brings us to the first idea: is be honest.
Wow, dude! Wow.
No, it is. But you've got to be honest, but you've got to speak, right?
You do.
And so when we're talking about communicating to solve the problem, if you withdraw and sulk and pout and refuse to talk. Listen, speaking the truth in love is what he said. Speaking. And he said, you do that so you can grow up in all things.
Yeah.
All right. So if I refuse to talk to you, if you make me mad and I just say, well, fine, how am I being honest and how am I working toward any resolution whatsoever?
You're not, but it really feels so good to just sometimes shut your mouth and walk away.
Yeah.
Which is, well, fine, I've got nothing to say to you. I'm just going to walk away because I'm creating peace if I walk away in anger.
Yeah. And what happens is when we walk away, all we do is make it worse.
Thank you.
Right. Now, there is waiting for the right time and the right place.
I get that.
And I get that. But
it's how you handle it, right?
Exactly.
I'm walking away so that I can keep the peace. Yeah, no.
Listen to what Ephesians 4 tells us. He said, put away lying. Let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor. Okay? And so if you've angered me and I pretend you haven't, according to this, I'm lying. Okay?
Wow.
And so you got to speak truth. And so if now there is a point, we'll bring this out in a moment. There is a point that you just have to say, you know what, everything's not worth fighting about.
Yeah, and again, I also think it's how you handle that situation.
Absolutely.
It's the heart and the mindset of what you're doing when you do it. When you're handling it with a mindset of, well, just like you're pouting, dude.
Right.
And so that's not really going to help
Exactly.
any situation. But now if your mindset is, okay, I'm doing everything I can biblically, I'm saying everything, I'm trying to speak scriptures into your life, and it's not doing any good. Now I'm just going to walk away because there's nothing more I can do.
Which exactly, and so we speak truth, but the other thing is we have to stay current. All right. So what happens is I become angry, and when I become angry, instead of saying, "Okay, Joey, I'm angry about," and you going, "Oh yes, I did that," or "I didn't do that," you misunderstood that, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
We can deal with it. All right. But what happens is I get angry, and so now I have a 3-year-long laundry list of everything you've ever done to make me angry.
I'm writing it all down.
And you're like, really, dude? I mean, you remember what I did on July the 3rd? And so stay current. It is impossible for you to deal with a laundry list.
Yeah.
But I can deal with the specific, but I can't deal with the laundry list.
Yeah.
And so stay current.
And I like that because if you are doing that, you're not, I think you said it before, mad at the person. Right. You're mad at what they are doing. And now I'm able to handle the problem, what's happening in your life. This is what made, not you made me upset. Right. You aren't the one that made me upset. What you did when you did this made me upset.
Right. Which is attack the problem, not the person.
There you go.
There you
go.
So if there's a problem, then let's deal with the problem. But the person is not the problem.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, the sin in that person's life may be the problem.
Absolutely.
The hypocritical attitude in that person's life may be the problem. But the problem is not the person.
Yeah.
And we have to do that. That's so important. Again, Proverbs 4:31. let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Until I put that away, I can't even start to have a conversation to bring resolution to what's taking place. And that is so important.
Somebody said to me a long time ago, Joey, that person's not the devil.
Right.
They didn't wake up with this evil mindset against you to say, ooh, how am I going to attack Joey today? That's not what was on that person's mind. That's what's on the enemy's mind.
Right.
Because he wants to kill, steal, and destroy you. But that person is not the enemy.
Right.
You can't treat them like the enemy. And I thought, man, that's a good statement.
No, and I think if we can only remember that.
Yeah.
All right, because you start attacking people.
Yes.
You're going the wrong direction. And then I think a fourth area on this whole idea of deal with it is you've got to learn to act and not react.
That's hard.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a hard one.
But you know what? Reaction will get you in trouble every time. Every time I have found myself emotionally exploding in a circumstance or a situation, it has been a reaction to either a wrong that was committed or what I perceive to be a wrong. But perception's 99% of reality, and if I perceive it to be wrong, I'm gonna blow a gasket.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
But at that point, I'm reacting, and instead of acting into a situation, and I think that is so important.
Okay, so act instead of reacting. Let me ask you this then, because we were talking about don't let things linger. But in that type of situation, don't you have to give it time? Like, don't you have to say, okay, this is what happened. I know if I say something right now, I'm going to say it out of anger. So I need to take time. I need to take it to the Lord. I need to pray about how I'm going to approach this. And I don't know what the time length is. I'm not saying there's a certain time. Oh, you've got to, people say count 100, take a day. Like, I'm not given a time. But isn't there some reality to, if in order for me not to react, I've got to take time.
Right. Yeah, but I think when we're talking about act and not reacting, the acting is that explosion of anger, or the reaction, rather, is that explosion of anger. It is that path of looking for how I'm going to even the score. Acting is setting that very intentional separation for prayer, that very intentional, I'm going to choose to forgive. I don't have to get mad at you for everything, or at a person. Everybody might think me and you fight all the time after this conversation.
I know.
But I don't have to vent on someone all the time. Sometimes I can just choose to forgive.
Yeah.
I can just choose to say, you know what, I'm not going to argue with them about this. Not that I'm being self-righteous or being, look at me. I'm just simply saying I choose not to argue with you about this. And
that's not sinful from what you were talking about before by ignoring it. That's not ignoring it. That's a choice to forgive as an action and let it go.
And the next area of dealing with it biblically is you at some point you have to set some boundaries. Okay? I want to be real careful. No one can make me angry. You've heard people say, they made me so. No, they didn't. You chose anger as a response. Yeah. They did not do that. But I do have to set boundaries. If each and every time I'm in a circumstance or a person or a place, and anger comes out of that, then what Matthew 7 tells me, that why am I casting my pearls before swine? Why am I putting myself in a circumstance or a situation that every time I'm there, it goes south?
Yeah.
Every time I talk to this person, I lose control or I walk away angry.
Because sometimes it's your family member and you have to have that conversation with them.
That could be. It's what we talked about a few weeks ago on toxic relationships.
Oh, yes.
All right. And if we're not setting boundaries in our life, then those toxic relationships are going to be there. And the other thing that I would touch on is we handle anger biblically by acting to solve, our part of the problem. As much as lies within you, Paul said to the Romans, live at peace.
Be at peace. Yep.
All right. I have no control over someone else's response. But I have all the control in the world over my response. And so I think if we look at those things, I think it makes all the sense in the world to say I cannot let anger dominate me.
Yeah.
And I control my response to that anger.
Okay. Wonderful.
And so I think it's important.
So everything that you just said, I want to condense it and I want to wrap it up and bring this thing to a close, because we've talked about anger, what anger is, and now you've given us some key scriptures, because I asked you for key scriptures that people can turn to. Hey, how do we deal with it biblically? But like we like to say, the reality of this is what? Like, what's the reality about anger and about how to deal with it?
Right. Let me just I give 2 or 3 things, to kind of in a summary statement.
Of course,
Number
it's you.
one,
You can't give one thing for
exactly.
anything.
Take responsibility.
Okay.
Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath. Yep. Do not give place to the devil. Take responsibility for your part of what's taking place.
Okay.
I can be angry at a circumstance. I can have righteous indignation. I can be angry about something in the world or in my life or whatever the case is. Yeah. But I have to take responsibility for my part. And when I take responsibility for my part, it prevents the thief from coming and stealing and killing and taking destruction in my life.
Well, it's like you said before, nobody can make you angry. You choose to be angry.
Right. And so I think that's the first thing. Second of all, we've got to train ourselves not to react to everything that comes into our life.
People listening to this, I don't know. I'm going to speak for myself, not for everybody listening. That's probably one of the harder things right there.
Absolutely.
Because reaction is just...
Well, it's how we're geared.
I just grew up reacting to things.
And Galatians 5 and verse 16 says, if I walk in the Spirit, I'm not fulfilling the lust of the flesh. All right? So if I am in the Spirit, I'm not reacting. If I'm reacting, I'm not in the Spirit.
Yeah.
And so it's not easy.
No.
And finally, I would say forgive. Yeah. Forgiveness is a choice.
Yep. So we said earlier.
And so I can forgive someone whether they want to accept that forgiveness or not.
Yeah.
Now, we've made this point before, and I want to be careful, because forgiveness does not mean I'm just going to invite you back into my life to wreak havoc again. All right. That's those boundaries that we talked about. But I can forgive you. I can say I own my part of the circumstance.
Yeah,
I forgive you, and I'm not going to let it consume and own me. And so forgiveness.
That's good. I know we have to forgive all the time. Like, we are continually in a state of forgiveness. But I like how you said it. You still set boundaries.
Yeah,
like I'll forgive, but I've got to set a boundary, because I can't let that continue to happen to me, because that's going to put me in a bad place.
Exactly. And I think a total wrap-up statement. When we say there.
So here it is.
Here it is. Speak only after you've heard. What happens is we speak long before we hear. And Proverbs 18:13 says, he who answers a matter before he hears it.
Yep.
It is folly, foolishness, and shame to him. And I would argue, most of the anger that comes into our life is speaking and reacting before we even hear what the person's trying to say. And so the reality is, as you asked me 10 minutes ago, speak after you've heard.
Wow.
And a lot of the anger we have, I would argue, would not even be.
Man, I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. And guys, thank you for joining us here on the Reality Is podcast, talking about real life, real faith. Do us a favor, download, subscribe, let us know you're there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify or even iHeart, hey, go to our YouTube channel or Facebook page, and you can actually leave a comment for us. Let us know, hey, I like that. This is what I heard. Hey, can you talk more about this? Or if you have a topic you'd like for us to talk about, we would love to be able to do that for you. So for now, we'd like to say God bless you. Have a great day. And remember, stay at peace. As much as it within you and your power, stay at peace. Don't be angry. God bless you guys.